Hello, my name is Austin, and this is Go Access, a YouTube channel dedicated to access in higher education and disability rights. Today, I will be covering the Marrakesh Treaty. The Marrakesh Treaty relates to accessible books and content for people with disabilities. It was signed by Trump October 9th, 2018. And in order to get a context of the Marrakesh Treaty, I'm first going to cover some basic copyright law information. So basically, the way copyright law works, like if you publish a book or something like that, or write a book, you have ownership of that book for your life plus an additional 70 years. The owner of the copyright controls the reproduction and distribution of that work for like a book. The Chafee Amendment was a big law for people with disabilities who want access to books in particular for content. What it did was allow the reproduction of books for students with print disabilities. A print disability does not necessarily mean a student with a visual impairment or is blind, but it can also mean students with like dyslexia or other disabilities that would require alternative media. The publisher does not need to be notified, so the college, can basically do that on their own terms and don't does not need to notify the publisher that they're scanning the book and making it accessible. And as I said, this law relates to schools and colleges. Um, so that's basically what I do as part of my job. I will cut up a textbook and scan it, or picture scan the textbook for a student, and it's a way of making it accessible so that it could be put into Kurzweil, which is a text to speech program, or we could make which basically will read the text to the student, and I will probably demo that in a later video. Um, so the issue here is that a lot of countries lack copyright exceptions that prevent books from being reproduced. So if your country, has a copyright rule that says that, you need a prior approval for the college or university to make the book accessible for a student with a print disability, that could be an issue. There's also just in general a shortage of Braille books for countries, particularly. And musical works were not covered, so a lot of times it could be difficult reproducing musical works in Braille, because that isn't covered under the Chafee Amendment. um, so what this treaty did was it allowed, what the Marrakesh Treaty does is it allows the reproduction of accessible formats um, for the participating countries, and the U.S. is able to share those formats like Braille books and other accessible materials. Um, so that way, for example, people who are blind in other countries have access to Braille books, which is a big thing, and now musical works are covered and can be reproduced according to the treaty. You have over 50 countries participating. I believe it's actually more because on January 1st, 2019, the what happened was that it came into effect for the EU, so all the participating EU countries are now included as well. So it's a very wide variety of countries that are taking part of this opportunity, which is very exciting. Um, However, that's the Marrakesh Treaty and what it's doing, which is good that it's helping provide those books, and particularly as I mentioned, formats that maybe there may be shortages of in other countries, and helping people with print disabilities have access. Um, what I want to highlight is that there are bigger issues going on that the Marrakesh Treaty doesn't exactly cover. One of those is basically, each college and university has an office responsible for making those alternate formats, which is what I help do. And the problem is publishers do not always respond to requests by disability services. So that's one of the issues, is you have publishers taking either not responding or taking a while to provide that accessible book. And the larger issue is how come students can't just buy accessible materials? Like if they want to buy a book, how come they just can't? The publisher can't just make it accessible for the student? And that is a bigger issue because it really relates to economics and the fact that the publishers aren't feeling that economic pressure yet to make accessible materials. They're starting to, but it's not quite there. Um, and, for example, I'm just going to say if you're a professor or work in a college, university, colleges and universities can put pressure on publishers and say, particularly when it comes to, the different formats that are used for like homework assignments and things like that, but as well as with books, saying we're not going to use your material if it's not accessible for all the students, and really making sure that they're taking the means to look through each thing that they're getting from the publisher, and that it is accessible to everyone, as that's really important to put pressure on them. The other issue is that what you're seeing is more and more publishers are looking into, I think, and it's particularly like Pearson, for example, and Vital Source, which which is the one here on the far left below Prime Video, is that type of system locks the student into using that particular app to access content, and the student with the print disability therefore might need to learn multiple apps. If Cine, which is another big publisher, comes out with their own, they're using MindTap right now for homework assignments, but if they had their own distribution source, which I think they probably do, and McGraw-Hill, everyone is basically trying to come up with their own app to access content because they're scared of copyright. And what it's creating is a situation where a student with a print disability would need to navigate multiple apps, um, and have a different app to access each book. And I think that's a real concern that I think is coming in the future, because a lot of these students have difficulty when it comes to processing, remembering, executive functioning, memory, and taking the time to have to learn each different app is kind of ridiculous. With the college I work for, we're using Kurzweil. I provide a full tutorial of Kurzweil for the student, and the idea is that they're using one app that covers all their accessible textbooks. We make sure it's in that one app, so they're not having to learn multiple things. I think it gets much more complicated if you start providing separate apps for everything. Then you could end up with 5, 6 apps to access all your books for a semester. I think that's a real burden on students with print disabilities. The other issue I want to point out, sometimes these publishers over exaggerate the accessibility of their app. This is when it comes to, looking at, like, particularly for homework assignments and things of that nature, or add on additional content from the book. That is where a lot of these publishers might say, oh, it's accessible, or we've done some testing and it looks like it's accessible, but they haven't fully checked with all the compatibility when it comes to screen readers, also looking at other things like the contrast ratio of the font, making sure everything is easily all the pages are easy to navigate for students, and they might not be considering all those factors, which means that their content might not be fully accessible. And I think that they're starting to get more pushback from colleges and universities to make sure that their content is accessible, because that is very difficult for someone like me who's working with assistive technology and alternate media to fix. Because then you have to start downloading every homework assignment and converting it, which is very time consuming. And again, you're looking at, as I mentioned, the multiple app thing is a bigger issue. I think that's growing. The other thing is a lot of publishers are kind of dodging requests by saying we're contracted with Bookshare, go through Bookshare, like Hachette or Random House, and or Penguin Books, and that's an issue because Bookshare can take up to 6 weeks to provide a book. Well, obviously, if you're requesting, maybe you're lucky and you're requesting 1 or 2 weeks before the course begins, you're not going to get enough time to get that book. You're going to have to scan it in some way and do it like that. You're not going to be able to get it directly from the publisher. So again, it reflects that it's great that Bookshare has so many books available to students with print disabilities, but there could be um, further improvements with that. And I think that's something that could be improved as well. I think the bigger factor, though, is there's a lot of people with print disabilities who want to read and want to absorb the content of the books, but the publishers really need to put an emphasis on making that content accessible, making EPUBs, daisies. These are different formats that are accessible for uh, people with print disabilities, and making them and publishing them, make even possibly a locked PDFs of some sort that could be converted to like a Kurzweil document or work with read and write. And I think that the issue of copyright, law needs to be downplayed a little bit for the promotion of accessibility. And I think this is again a disability rights and social justice movement, and that hopefully in time we'll see more and more accessible content from the publishers. I also want to mention Robert Martingino, who wrote a great article about the history and limitations of the Marrakesh Treaty, and I'm going to link his article below in my YouTube description. So you should definitely check it out. The Marrakesh Treaty is a small step forward, but it will not solve the major issues plaguing textbook accessibility. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you again in the next one.